what some of us are fighting for is to see that this oppressive system is crushed.
Zimbabwe, a nation of resilience, has witnessed waves of silent protests, stay-away strikes that have shaped its political and economic landscape since colonial times. These strikes represented strong acts of defiance by workers and activists in response to economic challenges and governance issues. In pre-colonial Zimbabwe, stay-aways were a powerful political tool for individuals and organizations to express dissent and demand socio-economic change. One of the earliest and most significant stay-away protests was the Rhodesia Commercial Workers' Union strike of 1927, led by Clemens Kadali, Masachin Lovu, and Charles Mzingeli. The Workers' Union was one of the first major African labor movements. It aimed to challenge colonial capitalist structures but was suppressed by the government, and for the next 21 years there were no major stay-away strikes in Rhodesia until 1948. The 1948 railway workers' strike was one of the most significant labor actions. Railway workers organized a strike that spread from Bulawayo to Gweru and led by Joshua Nkomo. The colonial government responded with severe repression, but the strike demonstrated the growing strength of African labor movements. After a government crackdown, tension lingered for almost a decade until the significant strike in 1956. The Salisbury bus boycott was a significant event in Zimbabwe's colonial history. It represented one of the first organized acts of resistance against racial discrimination and economic injustice in Rhodesia. The boycott was triggered by a fare increase imposed by the United Transport Company UTC, which disproportionately affected African commuters in Salisbury and Harare. Many Africans relied on buses for transportation to work, and the fare hike placed an additional financial burden on them, deepening existing racial and economic inequalities. The City Youth League CYL, led by James Robert Chikarama, organized a protest that mobilized African workers and residents to boycott buses, crippling the transport system. The boycott lasted weeks, showcasing the power of collective action. It forced the regime to reevaluate its policies, despite intimidation and arrests. The movement also helped lay the groundwork for future nationalist struggles, inspiring broader resistance against colonial rule. The Salisbury bus boycott is remembered as a pivotal moment in Zimbabwe's liberation history. It showed that economic resistance could be a powerful tool against oppression and helped shape the strategies used in later independence movements. Despite constitutional protections, the government has historically responded to stay-aways with heavy security deployments and threats against participants. Following the 1956 Salisbury bus boycott, the next significant stay-away strike by Africans in Rhodesia was the railway strike in Bulawayo, which occurred in September 1956. This strike was part of a broader wave of resistance against colonial exploitation and marked another critical moment in the labor movement's history. It starkly highlighted the rising tensions between African workers and the oppressive colonial government, showcasing the essential role of trade unions in galvanizing collective action. This strike not only marked a critical juncture in the struggle for workers' rights, but also served as a monumental statement against injustice and inequality. A year later, African workers across diverse sectors, including mining and agriculture, united in this powerful strike to challenge oppressive colonial policies, substandard working conditions, and economic exploitation. The 1957 general strike in Rhodesia was a significant moment in the history of labor and political resistance in the region. It was part of a broader wave of unrest as African workers and nationalists began to challenge the colonial system and demand better wages, working conditions, and political representation. The strike is viewed as a precursor to political groups like ZANU and ZAPU, which played key roles in the struggle for independence in later decades. 3 years later, another strike erupted. The 1960 railway strike in Rhodesia saw African railway workers demanding better wages and working conditions amid racial discrimination. Michael Andrew Mawema, the regional secretary of the Railway African Workers Union in the 1950s, played a key role in advocating for their rights. Just like before, the workers' plight for fair labor practices was met with government resistance, and the workers continued to languish under repressive colonial laws for the next years. Following the 1960 railway workers' strike, one of the major labor actions in Rhodesia was the 1964 stay-away strike. The strike was significant due to broad participation from African workers, serving as political resistance against colonial rule. It was caused by poor working conditions, racial discrimination, and lack of political representation for the African majority, led by notable African nationalists, including Joshua Nkomo of ZAPU and Nbanengi Sithole of ZANU. The 1964 strike, like previous ones, was suppressed using heavy force, arrests, and intimidation. The strike highlighted the increasing power of African trade unions in mobilizing workers and revealed tensions between the colonial regime and the African population, setting the stage for future resistance that led to Zimbabwe's independence. Two months later in July, the Wonky Colliery Strike of 1964 was another pivotal strike in Rhodesian labor history. The incident occurred at the Wonky coal mines, now Hwange, and was driven by poor working conditions, low wages, and colonial exploitation. The strike was significant not only for its immediate impact on the coal industry, but also for its role in galvanizing labor movements across Rhodesia. It highlighted the rising discontent among African workers and their readiness to confront oppressive systems despite harsh repression. The strike, though suppressed, raised awareness of labor rights and contributed to the fight against colonial oppression. This action united workers, marking a key moment in their fight for rights and better conditions. In the wake of the Wonky Colliery Strike of 1964, Rhodesia witnessed another pivotal moment in its labor history with the Railway Strike of 1965.